Cool. All right. So, yeah, I, if you don't mind, I'll start asking you about uh, being beautiful.
Bring it on.
Yeah. So, I guess actually, so I'm curious, like, what was your first reaction when you saw my tweet? Like when I asked, like, how did you feel, or how did you?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting tweet, as in it forces people to think about something that most people would probably prefer not to think about. This idea of I find myself beautiful is quite confronting, I think. So in that sense, it really seemed like a nice thing to poke at. And this is very related to my whole journey of relating to self. I think part of me finding myself beautiful is because I've healed the relationship with myself. And so I was like, yes, I want to contribute to this conversation. So I'm going to reply to this tweet and I'm going to do this.
Awesome. Cool. So you allude to like this journey of healing and finding yourself beautiful. Um, Well, can you yeah, tell me about that journey? Like what was the start of that journey? What all did that look like? And
That's a long story.
yeah.
um, I guess I'm going to focus on the beauty part just for the sake of this conversation. I definitely never believed that I was beautiful like as a teenager, because as a child, I think we don't really think about that. And then as soon as we become more aware of, let's say, social relationships between people, and when we start to find other people attractive, then maybe it's something changes, and then yeah, maybe we start to perceive ourselves as like through the eyes of the other, like am I seen as beautiful or not? And so it was always very clear to me that I was not beautiful. I didn't think of myself as beautiful. That probably lasted until I would say well in my 20s, where then maybe I started getting some outside validation, I guess. Once I was pursued by women who wanted me as their boyfriend, I was like, ooh, well, at least it seems that some people find me beautiful, even though I had trouble with that myself. But then it's all only much later, I would say, when I really dove deep into my self-healing process, which is something that I've been going through for the past, let's say, 10 years more seriously. So that was already in my late 30s when it started. And since then, gradually, never intending to find myself beautiful, right? Because that's not the goal of a healing process, or at least that wasn't for me. I think that was something that emerged along the way, that I noticed that I found myself beautiful now. In the general sense of like, I think I'm a beautiful person in the world, but also in the physical sense of like watching myself in the mirror and going like, hey, wow, I'm handsome, which is very strange in the beginning to notice that shift, because obviously, your traits don't really change. I get older, that's one thing, that changed. Um, but yeah, that relationship with the self through the image of myself in the mirror drastically changed as I developed a better relationship with who I am on the inside, and with the kind of language I use to speak to myself. And I'm going to pause there and see if there's anything you want to jump into specifically.
Yeah, that makes sense. That like I'm curious, you kind of meant like did you find that there was like a moment or like a few moments that like you remember clearly of catching yourself in the mirror or being like, "Oh, I am beautiful." Or was it like a really like gradual, slow kind of thing that crept into your awareness?
Yeah, I think it was definitely gradual. And I do remember specific instances of that, but those are more in the recent past. And so I don't remember when I first had that impulse of seeing myself and then noticing that I find myself beautiful. That I don't remember.
Could you share, would you be open to sharing like one of the more recent ones that you mentioned or that you alluded to?
Well, this morning, there's this big more. I'm in a hotel room at the moment in Bansko, a small mountain town in Bulgaria, and there's this huge mirror in the hotel room. And I stood there this morning before going to the gym, and I was like, fuck, I'm beautiful. You know, I'm hot, basically. I like seeing myself. And of course, that partly also is because I have put in effort, as in, you know, taking care of my body more, as in going to the gym. But it's also very much a softening of the relationship, as in, I don't judge myself so harshly anymore. And I think objectively, there are probably always things that you can point at and say, hey, you know, I wish this was bigger or smaller or less crooked or whatever it is. But as you kind of see more of the whole, I think that's kind of key. See more of the person, not just the features. I think the more I do that, the more I find myself beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like I noticed like a huge smile like go across my like face as you were like talking about yourself. I'm curious, like, do you remember what it was like to talk, like, look in the mirror? I don't know, in your like teenage years or in your early 20s?
Yeah, I do. And I remember specifically, again, what I just said, focusing on the specific parts of my face I didn't like, right? Like, oh my God, this like, there's this thing on my nose and it's ugly. I'm sure everybody just watches that. Things like that, you know. And I was very focused on trying to get people not to notice these things. And so I would maybe even try to camouflage certain aspects of my body with my clothing. Like I have this small deformation on my right side because there's what's it called, a lymphic fluid leak somewhere. So I have like the skin kind of like bulbs a bit on my right side. And I used to, as a kid, I used to really think that that was super ugly, and so I tried to hide it by wearing collars or something like that. And now I just don't care about it at all anymore. I hardly even see it, to the point that sometimes people point at it and go like, "Oh my God, what's that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's this thing. I have that, but it's not important anymore." But so yeah, I clearly do remember watching myself in the mirror and pointing out to myself all the things that I found really ugly.
Wow, dang. Yeah. That sounds like an amazing like like evolution and like shift and like how yeah, how you perceive yourself just in the mirror and like where your attention goes.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. Yeah, you alluded to like kind of taking care of yourself more and I'm curious like to what degree that has impacted like your self-image and how you perceive yourself and if that's been like really huge, if there were other things that were really huge, if yeah.
Yeah, well, I tend to think that, you know, the outer is a reflection of the inner in many ways. And so when I started getting more serious about healing, I also understood the dramatic impact of the state of the body on the state of the mind and the state of the emotions. Well, emotions, especially, they're just things that happen in the body. And I didn't have a good relationship with my body, nor did I have a good relationship with my mind, for that for that matter. But when I started changing that, like just doing small things at first, um, maybe eating more healthily, or maybe eating more healthily sounds wrong. It's more like avoiding the worst kind of food. That would be like a first step. And then slowly getting into like going to the gym for a bit, or maybe sitting down to meditate, maybe trying some yoga, stuff like that. As you feel your body transforming, there's a positive feedback mechanism that kicks in that is like, ooh, I look better now. And by looking better, you desire to continue the journey. You're like, ooh, like this feels good. I want to keep doing this. And at the same time, obviously, I think the inner part of that is even more important for me, at least. Feeling my relationship with my body changing, as in feeling more powerful in my body, feeling more at ease in my body, feeling less stiff, or basically just feeling my body, just connecting more with who I am as a physical presence. Also through dancing a lot, I have to say. Um, there's a certain kind of beauty that I perceive in myself that has nothing to do with the visual, that is purely about how I move within my body. And so I used to perceive myself on a dance floor as incredibly rigid and just a dork. Like, I didn't know how to move. And then slowly, as I explored ecstatic dance and gave myself the freedom to move as my body wants to move, more and more I felt like, oh, yeah, this is my body and it has a specific way to express itself that I can inhabit more fully. And that feels beautiful from the inside. I can literally be on the dance floor now and perceive beauty, like a sense of aesthetic beauty, just from feeling myself move. And it's not even intentional. It's almost like, the body's moving me or something like that. And the more I surrender to that, the more I see the beauty in that. And I think that also is reflected on the outside, of course, but I don't know because I don't see myself dancing. But that's my model of how that works.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting to like hear you talk about like perceiving beauty in yourself, like while dancing, like with your eyes closed, even. I'm like, yeah, like, yeah, like what does that feel like? Is it like a, yeah, yeah, what does that feel like?
That's a really interesting question. What does it feel like? I don't know. I think it's equally difficult. Like when you see a beautiful thing, whether it's a person or something else, what does that feel like? I'm not sure I haven't answered that question either. So, what is the experience of beauty like? I think it's something about a certain balance. Something I refer to a lot because I used to be a musician in like a previous part of my life is like this play between tension and release. I think that for me has a lot to do with the perception of beauty. It's actually interesting. I've been recording a podcast with a friend of mine, Brian, about beauty recently. So this kind of like tunes into that. Like, what is it? What does it mean to perceive beauty? But for me, I think the body thing is so important, even to go as far as like when I see someone who I perceive as beautiful on the street or wherever. Very often, the first thing that I will find beautiful is how that person moves in and with their body, much more than the
Mm,
just specific build of their face or anything like that. So it's a lot about how people inhabit their body, I feel. Um,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I can kind of like there's like a I'm only recently starting to get into ecstatic dance, but I imagine like from hearing you talk about like this balance, this tension and release, and like this way of movement, like yeah, I imagine something around like perceive like feeling that the move like whatever movements that come like feel perfect as they are or something of like the build up or like the release or something like that. And yeah, like yeah, I don't know if that resonates at all, but something that like that came to mind.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I think freedom comes to mind. When you feel that your body is free, that you're not trying to control the body as much. And I think similarly, probably the mind, the more you try to control what's happening, the more you create this kind of like constipated tension that I think maybe is not beautiful, or I perceive that as not beautiful.
mm,
And so sometimes when I see conventionally beautiful people or people who are seen as beautiful in like let's say magazines or movies or something like that, I often feel that they have a lot of this constipated constructed kind of beauty
mm,
that I
like
don't perceive as
stiffness,
particularly beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, or
like the
the
stiffness that you alluded to previously, like in your like when you were younger and you didn't, or when you first started dancing, or before with them.
yeah, maybe it's that kind of stiffness, but also the stiffness of like grabbing onto something, holding on to a certain image of who they are and
Mm,
trying to project that outwardly very strongly. And I think
mm,
the kind of people that I found beautiful, including now myself, there's this kind of acceptance and a surrender to what actually is, and
mm.
an ease with just
Inhabiting
perceiving
that.
what's true. Yeah.
Uh,
And I think that is particularly beautiful. So it doesn't really matter even what people physically look like that much. I think if there's
mm,
an integrity of sorts, even like a
mm,
full acceptance of what is, then I perceive that as
mm.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if like, when you're talking about like now when you see look at yourself in the mirror, like I wonder if you like see your body as like a medium through which that moves now. Like it's like like my body is like a way of me expressing this like this effortless, surrendered like flow, grace, whatever it is.
Yeah, but it's both ways, right? It's not just the body being a means of expression, it's also me just allowing to be in my body and
Right.
accepting that body as the thing that it is. And
Mm.
I feel that that in itself kind of like it's I would say something like honoring the body, whatever
Mm.
it's like, honoring it. And I think that's something that, for example, I perceived also when I traveled to Brazil. I think Brazil has a really interesting body culture as a culture. Um, so many people in Brazil are incredibly beautiful, regardless of the shape of their physical attributes. And I think that has to do with this idea that they fully accept their physical being, whatever shape it has, and they kind of move it with grace, like, no matter what it looks like.
Flaunt it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's just so beautiful to see. And that makes you realize that, yeah, it's not about the particular shape of your belly or your thighs or whatever, your nose. It's way more about how you allow yourself to be what you are somehow.
Mm. Yeah. This is really interesting for me because I think I really associate beauty with like being performative and like kind of that like what you
Mm,
were talking about earlier with like kind of the models, like the control, the like the like makeup, the like the angles, the like 500 selfies to get the one that makes me look the best. Like like there's a whole like that I find like really aversive. And I wondered like, and I'm sure to some extent, and I just don't know what to what extent like it like gets in the way of myself, like yeah, being able to relate to myself in that way.
yeah, I think it's really interesting you say that because this is the culture of the image, right? It's like you said,
Right.
you take 500 selfies to find the perfect one, but what you're doing there is removing the one thing that I think is the most important, which is the whole idea of inhabiting and moving within the body.
Right.
And
Like
so then
seeing all the
you
499 as perfect also, just like different.
yeah, but or just
Or
also understanding that all 500 of them are just snapshots, just images of an outward form, while for me, what makes someone beautiful is the movement, is how they are in
mm,
their body. And sometimes, and this is quite rare, but some people have this quality where you can see their movement in a picture almost, right?
mm,
But for a lot of people, including a lot of models, I think it's just like a thing they've learned to like inhabit certain poses that look good on a picture. But if you don't actually meet models in real life, you get a very different appreciation of who these people are and what they actually look like. And it's quite
mm,
confronting often because they're very often not what I would call traditionally beautiful. That's just it's a skill
mm,
almost. It's a skill and a combination of, as you mentioned, makeup, lighting, and then they know how to hold themselves for like the microsecond that the click is happening.
mm. That's quite interesting. Yeah. So like going through daily life, like what's it like to feel beautiful? Like, is that something that's like actively in your awareness? Is it something that pops into your awareness at moments? Is it kind of just a very background something?
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think feeling beautiful is something that I actively practice. So it's
Yeah, I think I lost you. Is it me or
it
is it?
helps me also see.
Sorry,
Oh,
I think I lost
sorry.
you for the last 15 seconds.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
I'm just going to rephrase.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I think beauty, seeing myself as beautiful or perceiving myself as beautiful is something I practice throughout the day. It's part of like bringing awareness to it. And I think it also, and maybe it's the same thing in the end, it's practicing seeing beauty on the outside. it's practicing seeing the beauty around me, taking time to notice what is beautiful, the specific way a shadow falls on a wall, or a specific flower in the wind, or whatever it is, really, the movement of a person on the street. And as I tune in more to the beauty of the world around me, I notice that there is more appreciation for my own inner beauty as well, and for the way I hold myself in the world. So I think they are related. And the more we cultivate our own beauty, the more we're able to perceive or appreciate beauty in the outer world, I believe.
Mm, yeah, that's really beautiful, like poetic, like this kind of like like this it sounds like what I'm hearing is this almost like a, how you do something is how you one something is how you do everything or something. Like there's a phrase like that, like like the extent to which you're
Yeah.
able to perceive it like outside, like in the outer world, eventually like you are a thing that you perceive and you end up perceiving yourself that way. And but then like the other half of the like the cycle is like investing in yourself and like like cultivating and finding that beauty within, and that allows that like further allows you to see it on the outside and in the outside world.
Mhm. Yes, and since it's a feedback mechanism, you can also hack it that way in the sense that I like to surround myself with beauty. I like to go to beautiful spaces. And I've never really thought about this in this way, but I assume that I also find it easier to find myself more beautiful when I am surrounded by beauty. And
Mm.
like
Oh.
dressing is part of that, right? It's like when I put on clothes that I think are beautiful and I go to a beautiful space, the whole
It can't
experience of
help but rub
beauty,
off on you.
yes, exactly. You can't help but find yourself more beautiful. And also, I tend to believe that in those kind of spaces, then more people are aware of that and they will also see more beauty around them. So they will also look at you seeing more beauty in you. Whereas if you go to places where
Mm.
things are more ugly, and I don't necessarily mean ugly in like a, it's not a poor rich kind of thing, right? I am, for example, incredibly into the kind of aesthetics that the very simple architecture of Japan brings. So that can be just like an earthen floor even and some wooden beams and very very simple, but I think that's really beautiful. And I think in those kind of spaces you then meet people who also perhaps are more able to see the beauty in you. And I think seeing
Mm.
others see you as beautiful will also help you see yourself as
Yeah.
beautiful. So it's kind of like it's all connected, right?
Right. That's so interesting that you get like that. You offer that example because that's really like provoking for me. Or like I think the first thing that came to mind of that when you were talking about like putting yourself like wearing beautiful clothes, being in like a beautiful space was like uh I was imagining like was it like awards shows, award ceremonies and stuff, where it's like all these beautiful people dressed up all beautiful and stuff, and just like yeah, I guess it reveals like my association with beauty, which is again like this like performative thing, this like oh like dressing up nice to look good for the camera to um yeah, and just and imagining that being in that space would be really uh like would be this whole like beauty status game that would actually be very like unsafe and like uh I don't know, insecurity cultivating or something like that.
You're back.
Hey, sorry about that. I think
No
yeah,
worries.
my internet died. um cool. Recollect. Oh, I was just sharing about how like you when you offered the example of like being in a simple like Japanese building and like that aesthetic like contrast like to contrast that with what came to mind immediately for me, which was like award shows and like celebrities dressed up all fancy and at least perceiving my perception that it was like this that it's like this performative status game sort of thing, which obviously like portrays like my relationship to beauty and like assume and this assumption of that of its performative nature. Um, yeah, but yeah, like I can really see that, like to real like yeah, like focusing on what you want to see more of, and like in like a like
Hmm.
in context in which everyone is like genuinely like about this aesthetic, whatever, and genuinely appreciative of it in a like non like competitive way or something like that. How like that could be a really virtuous sort of cycle.
Yeah, what comes to mind is something like this competition that you named, right? And in the performative sense, if you are part of that world of performative beauty, then everything is a competition. And it's always about, am I more beautiful than the other? I think if you let go of that and I guess try to cultivate some kind of an abundance mindset as like, me being beautiful doesn't prevent you from being beautiful as well. And the the crucial aspect there is that we can beautiful in different ways, on different axes. And there is no singular kind of measurement that could decide who is more beautiful. And even if there were, it doesn't matter, something like that. Like, hey, we can all just be beautiful together in our own
Yeah.
ways and just celebrate that for all of us. And well, I think that's also part of like the culture of something like an ecstatic dance, or to a lesser extent maybe also yoga, or these kind of spaces where beauty is celebrated more as like a reflection of truth, as I was speaking to earlier, right?
Mm,
It's like just be truthful,
yeah.
just be who you are. And the more you are who you are without worrying how others perceive you, the more beautiful you become.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it's been said before, but I was just struck by this like beauty as truth sort of thing of like, yeah, like actually there's like an intuitive way in which that makes sense. And like that actually ties together a lot of what you were talking about, like with the body moving as it wants to. Like it's not trying to be beautiful, it's just doing what it wants to. And like there's a like beauty in that authenticity and like just the and that just expression of truth and its truth. And like I think maybe there's probably something in there about like how you're talking, like similar to how, or you're talking about how like people move in a way that, and like something about that being beautiful. It's like the same sort of just like, does it feel natural? Does it have that kind of like, this is how this is supposed to move. This is how this is supposed to be like sort of thing. And as it is, um, yeah, yeah, I really like that. Cool. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I feel like this is giving me a lot to reflect on.
Hmm. That is always a good thing, I believe.
Yeah. Is there anything, yeah, anything that you haven't shared about like beauty and your experience of it that I haven't asked about that you'd be interested in talking about?
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking. Probably not, as it's not something I have thought about a lot. Like, when I saw your tweet, I was like, oh, wait, yes, I do find myself beautiful, but it's not really part of what I've been thinking about the past years. That's definitely not the
Hmm.
focus. So I feel like I don't have many well-formed thoughts about the subject. I'm super happy to explore it with you. It was nice, but yeah, I think I nothing stands out that I think I would want to say.
Hmm. How has it been to like share about this? Like,
Hmm.
has it been interesting? Has it felt kind of pedantic? Yeah, how has it felt?
Oh, that's a really interesting question because I have no self-judgment whatsoever, right, about finding myself beautiful. So, um, it was nice to just be able to have a chat about how that is for me and how I perceive it. And again, I'm not worried at all how people will perceive me because of what I say. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of maybe something that's way more interesting for me and way more important is this idea of living with integrity, like truly aligning my my beliefs and my actions in the world, and
Hmm.
not being afraid to fully own everything that I do and say and believe and think.
Oh.
And yeah, in that way, this conversation could never have felt edgy for me because
Mm,
it's just about what's real, and I
yeah,
own that reality. So yeah,
right. It sounds like this general like impetus of your life, like the like this beauty and your like your physical body and your aesthetics, like is just one like expression of that, is one like one domain of that general like leaning into like and continuing to grow on this in this like self-expression and authenticity and kind of being unapologetically yourself, whether it's in your body or in your work or in your outfit or in your relationships or your whatever it is.
yeah, and I feel like it's almost something like an emergent property. So it's not the thing that I have ever thought about or focused on. It's just like, oh, this happened. Just like joy, for example. I've noticed that in my practice of releasing tension, which is one of the practices I have, just noticing tension and releasing it. Joy just arises naturally from that process. It's a byproduct. It's not that I've ever decided, like, hey, I'm going to cultivate joy. That just happened. And I think beauty is something similar. And now you could say,
Yeah.
like, what are the things that you actually cultivate? And that would be a good question. And
Yeah.
for me right now, it's mostly about presence and kindness. I think those are the two qualities that I feel have the most impact on both my own life, like the way I am in the world, the way I perceive myself, and on the world around me. So yeah, I
Mm.
think those are the two that matters most.
Yeah. Presence and kindness. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting for me. Like this, like the vibe of this conversation to me has felt very like celebratory of like
Mm.
yeah, like wow. Like I feel like I got it. So I had some sense from you of like kind of like going back to like teenage college version of you to early 20s version of you and yourself and like this like I feel like I perceived some like wow like some gratitude, some like wow, this is like so beautiful that like I like that you see yourself this way now. And yeah, like I'm celebrating for you also, like, and I already mentioned jealousy, but yeah, yeah, this was so beautiful for me to hear and to like for you to like receive from you.
That's
So
really good to hear. Thank you, Johnson.
yeah, cool. Anything else that you want to say before like we wrap this up?
Thank you for this opportunity to talk about this. It was a fun exploration, and I appreciate your curiosity and the open way in which you have held space for this conversation. Yeah, that was really nice.
Okay, thanks, Joachim. Cool. All right, I'll kill the recording now.